He didn't breed them. They were a gift from the king of Siam himself. Those two cats, a male called Pho and a female called Mia, had spent their entire lives inside temple walls. 600 years of ancestry behind them, recorded in a manuscript called the Tamra Mayo, the Cat Book Poems. Cream-colored bodies, dark faces, ears, paws, and tails. Eyes the color of deep sapphire. They were called Victorian-era, the moon diamond. And for centuries, nobody outside the royal court of Siam had ever touched one. I've spent 11 years tracing what happened between that temple and the modern show ring. The breed that Gould carried onto a steamship bound for England would, within a century, be reshaped so completely that the original animal became unrecognizable. Not improved, not refined, replaced by something its creators would never have called Siamese. That story begins in a genetics laboratory in Bangkok, where a man named Niran Prasurchri has been collecting DNA samples from temple cats and finding answers that the Western breeding establishment doesn't want to hear. Niran is 42, lean, quiet, wire-rimmed glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. He runs the Feline Genomics program at Chulalongkorn University, and his office walls are covered with photographs, not of show cats, but of the animals he's found living in remote temples across southern Thailand. The cats in those photographs look nothing like the Siamese you'd see at a Western cat show. Their heads are round, apple-shaped. Their bodies are muscular and compact. Their ears sit proportionally on their skulls, not flared out like satellite dishes. They look like cats. Beautiful, ordinary, ancient cats. The Siamese that wins ribbons in Western show rings today has a skull shaped like a narrow wedge, enormous bat-like ears, a body so elongated and tubular that veterinarians have compared it to a greyhound in feline form. The transformation took roughly 80 years of selective breeding, and it stripped away nearly half the breed's original genetic diversity.
I kept thinking there had to be a mistake in the sequencing. So I ran it again. Same result. And again. Same result. The mitochondrial DNA of the temple cats and the modern show Siamese, they've diverged so far that you could argue they're functionally different breeds.
To understand how that's possible, you have to go back to the beginning, not 1884, further, to a kingdom that no longer exists, a manuscript that most Westerners have never heard of, and a cat that was never meant to leave the temple compound. The Ayutthaya kingdom ruled what is now Thailand from 1350 to 1767. At its peak, it was one of the largest cities on earth, bigger than any capital in Europe, and inside its temples lived cats that the monks considered spiritually significant, not gods, not supernatural, but carriers of merit, living proof that a temple was blessed. The Tamra Mayo, written during this period, describes 17 breeds of cat. Some brought good fortune, some brought disaster. The Victorian-era, the ancestors of every Siamese cat alive today, were among the luckiest. Cream bodies with dark extremities, sapphire eyes, a temperament the manuscript describes as loyal as a shadow, vocal as a market trader. For centuries, these cats stayed inside the temple system. Monks bred them carefully, not for appearance, but for health and temperament. The bloodlines were tracked informally, passed down through monastic generations like oral history. No kennel club, no breed standard written on paper, just 600 years of living memory. And then the British arrived. Edward Blencowe Gould was the British Consul General in Bangkok. A career diplomat, shrewd, well-connected, fascinated by Siamese culture. In 1884, King Chulalongkorn, Rama V, presented him with a breeding pair of Wichanmat cats as a diplomatic gift, a gesture of trust between nations. What happened next was not trust, it was transformation. Fo and Mia arrived in England in the autumn of 1884. Within 2 years, their offspring were being exhibited at cat shows. Within a decade, the British had established the first Siamese breed standard, written by people who had never set foot in a Thai temple. And within a century, the breed those monks had preserved through wars, famines, and the fall of empires would be bent into a shape its ancestors wouldn't recognize. But that's only half the story, because back in the temples of southern Thailand, the original cats never left. They're still there. Niran found them, and when he compared their DNA to the cats winning Best in Show at Western competitions, the numbers told a story that no breed club wanted printed.
The genetic divergence between the temple population and the modern Western Siamese, it's not a small gap, it's a canyon. 43% loss in heterozygosity. Founder effects compounded over 80 years of closed stud books. The show cats aren't a refined version of the temple cats. They're something else entirely.
Something else entirely. That phrase would follow Niran Prasurchri across 11,000 miles, through 2 continents, and into a confrontation with an institution that has spent a century telling the world it perfected the Siamese cat. The DNA said otherwise. And DNA, unlike breed registries, doesn't care about politics. 13 years before Edward Blencoe Gould carried Fo and Mia out of Bangkok, a different scene was unfolding 5,000 miles away, inside a glass and iron palace on a hill in South London. July 13th, 1871. The Crystal Palace, Sydenham. Harrison Weir, artist, poultry breeder, and self-appointed authority on all things feline, had organized the first national cat show in British history. 160 cats sat in wire cages on trestle tables. Persian longhairs, British shorthairs, tabbies of every stripe, and tucked in a corner, described in the catalog as an unnatural nightmare kind of cat, were 2 Siamese. Those cats, brought to England by an unnamed traveler, had round heads, sturdy bodies, and dark points against pale cream fur. They looked almost exactly like the temple cats Niran would photograph 150 years later. The show judges didn't know what to make of them. The audience stared. One reporter called them frightful and suggested they belonged in a zoological garden rather than a competition. The British, it turned out, weren't impressed by 6 centuries of sacred breeding. They had their own ideas about what a cat should look like. After Gould's cats arrived in 1884, the transformation began quickly. British breeders liked the Siamese coloring, the dark points, the blue eyes, but they wanted a more dramatic silhouette, longer, sleeker, more angular. Within 2 generations of selective breeding, the heads began to narrow. The ears grew larger, the bodies stretched.
What we did was bring out the breed's true potential. The Thai cats were lovely animals, but they were unrefined. Selective breeding is an art, and like any art, it requires a vision. Our vision was elegance.
Constance Bellingham Howe has chaired the British Siamese Cat Society for 19 years. 71 years old, silver-haired, a voice that could cut crystal. She speaks about Siamese cats the way a museum curator speaks about a collection, with absolute certainty that she knows what belongs in the frame and what doesn't. Niran Prasertri disagrees, and he has 11,000 DNA samples to back him up. In 2019, Niran traveled to the temples of Nakhon Si Thammarat province in southern Thailand. It took him 3 days by road from Bangkok, the last 40 kilometers on a dirt track that dissolved into mud during the monsoon season. At the top of a hill surrounded by rubber plantations and coconut palms, he found Wat Khao Pra Noi, and inside those temple walls, he found a colony of 37 cats that stopped him in his tracks. The head monk, Phra Anurak, 78 years old, saffron robes worn thin as paper, had maintained the colony for 53 years. He'd received the cats from his predecessor, who received them from his predecessor, stretching back through an unbroken chain that the monks themselves couldn't date with certainty.
We don't count the years. The cats were here before me, they'll be here after me. That's enough.
Niran collected cheek swabs from every cat in the colony. He photographed them, measured their skulls, documented their temperaments. Then he carried those samples back to his lab in Bangkok and ran them against the genetic profiles of 214 registered Western show Siamese from 12 countries. The results, when they came back, were devastating.
43% reduction in heterozygosity. That means nearly half the genetic diversity present in the temple population is gone from the modern showlines. Lost. Through 80 years of closed stud books and selective breeding for appearance. The show cats are beautiful, I won't deny that. But genetically, they're walking through a bottleneck that gets narrower every generation.
It wasn't just a diversity loss. The mitochondrial DNA, the maternal lineage, passed down unchanged from mother to daughter, showed that the Western show population descended from fewer than 20 founding cats. 20 individuals, representing a gene pool that once spanned thousands of temples across an entire kingdom. Niran published the findings in the Journal of Feline Medicine and Genetics. He expected debate. He expected pushback. What he got was a wall. Temple strays, that's what she called them. Cats with an unbroken 600-year lineage. Temple strays. Niran petitioned the World Cat Federation, the governing council of the cat fancy, and 3 regional breed registries to recognize the traditional Wichian Mat as a distinct heritage breed. Every single one declined. The reasons varied: insufficient documentation, lack of standardized breeding records, outside the scope of current recognition protocols. But the message was the same. The Western establishment had decided what a Siamese cat was. A Thai geneticist with DNA evidence wasn't going to change that.
I thought the science would be enough. I thought, if you show people the data, they'll listen. They'll see what happened. But they don't want to see. Because seeing means admitting that the breed they've spent a century perfecting was perfect before they touched it.
Niran flew home from a conference in Geneva in 2021 with rejection letters in his briefcase and a question he couldn't answer. If the institutions that control breed standards won't acknowledge the original cats, does preservation even have a path forward? He called Phra Anurak from the airport, told him everything. The rejections, the dismissals, Constance Bellingham Howe calling his temple cats strays. There was a long silence on the line. Then the old monk said something that Niran didn't understand at the time, but would change everything.
The cats have been here for 600 years, Niran. They didn't ask the British for permission then. Why would they need it now?
Niran sat with those words for 3 months. He didn't publish, didn't petition, didn't pick up the phone when a journalist from Cat Fancier Quarterly called for a comment on Constance Bellingham Howe's dismissal. He sat in his lab in Bangkok staring at genetic data on a screen and thinking about a 78-year-old monk who'd never heard of the governing council of the cat fancy and didn't need to. The lie Niran had believed, the assumption that had guided his entire career, was simple: that the Western breed registries were the gatekeepers of legitimacy. That if the original Wichinmat cats weren't recognized in their system, they didn't truly exist. He'd spent 3 years collecting DNA, building an airtight scientific case, and presenting it to institutions that had no interest in hearing it. Not because the science was wrong, because acknowledgement would mean admitting that a century of improvement had been demolition. In March of 2022, Niran drove back to Wat Khao Pranoi. The dirt road was worse than he remembered. 2 flat tires before he reached the hill. When he climbed the stone steps, worn smooth by 6 centuries of bare feet, Pra Anurak was sitting on the temple porch with a cat in his lap, as if he'd been expecting him. The monk set the cat down, a cream-bodied female with dark chocolate points and eyes like polished lapis, and walked Niran into the temple's inner hall. Behind the main Buddha statue, in a teak cabinet that hadn't been opened in years, Phra Anurak pulled out a bundle wrapped in waxed cotton. Inside was a handwritten breeding record, not the Tamra Male. That manuscript sits in the National Library in Bangkok. This was something smaller, more personal. A monastic log kept by successive head monks at Wat Khao Pranoi, documenting every litter born in the temple compound since 1912. Over 100 years of births, deaths, pairings, and health observations, written in spidery Thai script on paper that crumbled at the edges.
I held that book and my hands were shaking. A century of continuous breeding documentation from a single temple. No kennel club in the world has records this detailed for a single location. Not one.
That book changed the strategy entirely. Niran stopped trying to convince Western registries. He started building something new. Over the next 18 months, he partnered with 12 temples across southern Thailand, each one maintaining its own colony of traditional Wichinmat cats. He trained monks to collect cheek swabs using simple kits he designed himself. He mapped the genetic profiles of 341 cats across the temple network and built the first comprehensive DNA database of the ancestral Siamese population. Then he called Dr. Rosalind Kessler at UC Davis.
When Niran sent me the data set, I cleared my calendar for a week. 341 cats from 12 distinct temple populations, with a monastic breeding record going back to 1912. This wasn't just interesting, this was the most complete pre-export genetic snapshot of any cat breed in existence.
Kessler's independent analysis confirmed everything. The temple cats carried genetic markers that had been completely lost from Western showlines. Alleles connected to immune function, cardiac health, and neurological resilience, bred out of the modern Siamese through decades of selecting for skull shape and ear size. The breed clubs had been so focused on making the Siamese look a certain way, they'd accidentally stripped out the genes that kept it healthy.
Every breed undergoes refinement. To suggest that the show Siamese is somehow lesser than a temple cat is to misunderstand the entire purpose of selective breeding.
Niran didn't respond to that statement. He didn't need to. By 2023, the Temple Cat Preservation Network, The Witchy-Mott Heritage Project was operating independently of any Western registry. 12 temples, 300 cats, a DNA database growing every month, and a Welsh documentary filmmaker named Owen Griffith, who'd been filming the entire journey for 2 years. Owen's documentary, Moon Diamond, The Cats the World Forgot, premiered at the Bangkok International Film Festival in November 2023. It opens with 40 seconds of silence. A Witchy-Mott cat sleeping between temple pillars, frangipani blossoms falling around it, the drone of cicadas. Then Niran's voice off camera says 5 words that became the film's tagline.
They didn't forget. We did.
The film reached 14 million views in its first month online. It didn't change the Western breed standard. Constance Bellingham-Howe called it well-produced propaganda. The governing council of the cat fancy issued no statement. None of that mattered because the film did something more powerful than changing a registry. It changed the conversation. Breeders in Thailand, Australia, and Scandinavia began requesting genetic samples from the temple populations for outcross programs. 3 Thai universities launched feline genetics courses using Niran's data, and the Thai Ministry of Culture designated the Witchy-Mott temple cat colonies as living cultural heritage sites. The first time a domestic animal received that classification in Thai history. Niran didn't win the fight he set out to fight. He didn't get a certificate from a Georgian townhouse in Surrey. He got something the Siamese cat needed far more, a future that isn't controlled by the people who reshaped its past. I visited Wat Khao Phra Noi last August, climbed those stone steps in the monsoon heat, shirt plastered to my back, frangipani sticking to my shoes. Phra Anyarak was sitting in his usual spot. A cream-bodied cat with chocolate points was nursing 4 kittens in the shade between 2 pillars, the exact spot where, according to the monastic log, cats have nursed their young since at least 1912. The monk didn't ask about breed registries, or DNA databases, or documentary film festivals. He just gestured at the cat and her kittens with one gnarled hand and smiled. In 1884, a diplomat carried 2 cats out of a temple and gave them to a country that spent a century reshaping them into something unrecognizable. The breed clubs called it refinement. The geneticists call it a bottleneck. The monks call it what it is, a gift that was never returned. But the original cats, the real Witchy-Mott, the moon diamonds of the Tamra Mayo, they never left. They're still sleeping between the pillars, still nursing kittens in the shade, still carrying 600 years of unbroken DNA in every cell of their bodies, waiting for the world to remember what it forgot. The temples kept their promise. The question now is whether we'll keep ours.